Now we're going to be getting into arrays shortly, and on the topic of objects, I just want to take a step back and dive a bit deeper into how engines view objects. It's important because at a very high level, all JavaScript engines work the same way. There's a parser that goes through your code, and then there's an interpreter and a compiler that optimizes that code into machine code. But now I want to just discuss the JavaScript object model. It's interesting, and we're going to be looking at a few different implementations of this in the upcoming lectures. So this is called more of just a very quick intro into the JavaScript object model. And when I click this button, we're going to dive into the lecture. As I mentioned, this is just a quick introduction to the JavaScript object model. And what I mean is that how does the engine set up and access object properties? Because once you start becoming an awesome programmer, you're going to want to understand the intricacies of objects, how the engine accesses these. You're going to encounter bugs, and now you'll know how to fix them. So these are good things to know. Anyway, the starting point is to know that the ECMAScript specification essentially defines all objects as dictionaries. What I mean by that is that you've got keys on each object, and those keys are mapped to what's known as the JavaScript engine as property attributes. And of course, the easiest thing to do is to start with an example. Let's create an object via the object literal syntax, and it just has two properties on it, x and y. And remember what I said? The ECMAScript spec defines it as dictionaries, and it maps keys to property attributes. Well, the keys in this instance are x and y. It's the name of the property. Those are the keys. And those keys are each reference to property attributes. And those property attributes have certain values attached to them. One is the value of the actual name of the property. In this case, x has a value of 10, y has a value of 20. There's three other properties attached to this: writable, enumerable, and configurable. What do they mean? Well, just very briefly, writable just determines whether the property can be reassigned. Enumerable determines whether the property can be seen in a for-in loop. And as you can see, for our x variable, this enumerable property is set to true. And this is because every new property is enumerable by default. There's an exception to this, but we'll discuss that later. For now, just know that enumerable is set to true by default. And the last property is configurable, and that determines whether the property can be deleted. And don't get weirded out by these double brackets. The double square brackets is just how the spec, the ECMAScript specification, shows properties that aren't directly exposed by JavaScript. So you're probably thinking, well, if they're not exposed by JavaScript, can we ever see them? And the answer is yes, you can. You can access them with the object getOwnPropertyDescriptor method. Let me quickly show you how you access these. Okay, very quickly, let me show you how we can access these property attributes: enumerable, writable, configurable, and the value. Remember how I said we can access these. Don't get intimidated by all those square brackets. Using the same example we did in the lecture now, let's just define an object and let's just say x is 10. And instead of having y, let's just have x. Just easier for us. If we console log this object out and we open it up here, and you look at its prototype, and you look at the constructor, if you scroll down, you can see there, getOwnPropertyDescriptor. There is this method available to all objects we create in JavaScript. Awesome, right? So let's use it. So let's access the global JavaScript object, and then we want getOwnPropertyDescriptor. Now we've got to define the object, which is obj, and we've got to define the variable that we want, and that is x. If we console log that out, there you go. You've got your value, writable, enumerable, and configurable.